Yes, sir, Mayor. And just before I do that, council members, when you go to speak, if you would please click your mic on, and when you're done, click it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes,
Present.
Mr. Battle,
Here.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Here.
Mr. Moody,
Here.
Dr. Whitaker,
Present.
Mr. Woodard,
Here.
Mayor Glover.
Here. Mr. Stromberg, Attorney Stromberg, sir, you have the floor.
The first presentation tonight will be by Assistant Attorney Kelsey Swearinga. Kelsey will be updating us on the broadband authority and the laying of the fibers and so forth, and the agreements that we'll be looking to enter into. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Thanks, Burl. So, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the legal framework behind our broadband ring and our broadband authority. Next slide. So, a little bit of history of how we got here. Back in 2017, City Council approved the fiber ring in the 2018 budget as a capital improvement project. And they did so for the primary purpose of lowering the city's rising costs for internet. So in the long term, this is going to save the city money on that it pays for internet service to each of its facilities. But it also is a dual purpose of increasing resident and commercial access to affordable high-speed internet. Next slide. So back in September of last year, City Council created the Portsmouth Community Network Broadband Authority. I'm just going to refer to that as the authority. And they did so they have an entity that could manage that fiber ring that's being built. Now, the authority is completely controlled by the Board of Directors, and you, as City Council, are the Board of Directors, so you are in complete control of this authority. The authority cannot do anything unless you, as the Board of Directors, say so. Now, the authority hasn't had a meeting yet, and that's because it was stood up earlier than it was needed, so that once the fiber ring was complete, it would be ready to go, and you can kind of hit the ground running. So that's why we're coming to you now with some plans as to what to do with the authority, because we're reaching the point where we're almost complete with the fiber ring, and we can start looking at both some short-term and long-term plans. So some of the short-term or immediate plans that we have for the ring, subject to your approval, would be first to grant the Portsmouth Public Schools access to the fiber ring. And this would be great for the schools, and it would allow them to get the same benefits that the city is going to get from the fiber infrastructure. So in the long term, it'll allow them to save on their internet service costs while having greater capacity and the potential for even greater speed. Another short-term plan that we have is to use the authority to provide PRHA facilities and residents with free high-speed Wi-Fi. So the authority can use its own ring and pump out free high-speed internet to people who live at PRHA facilities. Next slide. Now, some of the long-term plans include leasing the unused space on that fiber ring. So when the fiber ring was first designed, it was intentionally designed to have a lot more capacity than the city needs for its immediate or even its future needs. And that was so an authority could come in and lease that unused space to generate revenue for the authority. So that would likely be leased to other internet service providers, data centers, or even companies with large data needs. But that's completely up to you as the authority if you choose to go that route. And if you do, what fees you're going to charge and what level of service you want to provide. I mean, it could be as simple as just making these leases with these larger companies, or you could provide internet service to Portsmouth residents. It's completely up to you. Next slide. Thank you. Now, the regional ring and the regional authority are completely separate from Portsmouth's ring and Portsmouth's authority. So Portsmouth's ring only exists within the city of Portsmouth. It's a smaller ring within the city. The regional ring is this regional idea to build a giant ring that's going to go through all of the south side localities, and then it's going to hook that ring up to the place in Virginia Beach where the transatlantic cables fall. So when it's built, it's going to be really great for Portsmouth because it means that businesses that are located on our ring will have a direct connection to where the transatlantic cables land in Virginia Beach. And while that's great, it is years away from completion. It's a very ambitious project, whereas our ring is almost complete and I believe should be complete by the end of the year, if not sooner. Completely separate from both the Portsmouth ring and the regional ring are fiber franchise agreements. So these are similar to small cell franchise agreements, and they're required when an internet service provider or a data center or really any third party wants to construct their own cable within Portsmouth's right-of-way and occupy the right-of-way. The difference is, unlike small cell, which is a wireless device on a pole, these are fiber lines typically underground. But these are non-exclusive agreements, and that's because many lines can occupy the same right-of-way. So just because you grant one company a fiber franchise agreement doesn't mean you can't do the same thing a bunch of times. It's not a particularly limited resource. And they're pretty common now. Virginia Beach does them all the time because of their location next to the transatlantic cables. And it's really great to have because it expands resident and commercial access to high-speed internet, because the more fiber franchise agreements you have, the more fiber infrastructure is in the city of Portsmouth. And I bring that up just because tonight you're going to have a couple requests for these fiber franchise agreements, and you'll notice that the process for that is eerily similar to small cell, and that's because it comes from the same part of Virginia code. So the next steps will be to hold an initial authority meeting so that you can organize the authority and figure out what you want to use the authority for, what level of service you want to provide, how far you want to take that. We are currently working on that agreement with the schools to provide them access to the ring, and once that's ready, we'll bring that to you. And we're also working on those agreements to make that free Wi-Fi at PRHA properties happen. But we're going to continue to update you as we get closer to the completion of the ring, so we can talk to you about more opportunities of how you want to use the ring. And ultimately, it's up to you, both as city council and in your capacity as the board of directors of the authority. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Swaringa. Are there any questions from my colleagues on council? Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please raise your hand up just so I can see? I heard something over there, but I just need everybody to raise their hand. That way I can identify you. So we'll start here first with Councilwoman Lucas-Burke, and then I saw Councilmember Moody's hand and Councilmember Battle. So, ma'am, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Attorney. Thank you for the presentation. I guess my question is, the board is the council, so we will need to determine our bylaws on how often we're going to meet, what officers will be set in place, and how we will deliberate over any decisions that are made, and how soon do we need to do that. I know that the fiber, the process is years away, but
Right.
because we are identified as the board, how soon do we need to get those items set in place?
Well, you can make bylaws. So when the authority was first formed, it was formed with articles of incorporation that do go over some of what would normally be incorporated in bylaws, but you can certainly create your own bylaws for the board once you have that first meeting as well. And I'm going to defer to either Mr. Jones or the city manager on exactly the date of when you'd have your first meeting. But you can meet as soon as you'd like to start going over that process.
Right, and I guess the frequency, if it's going to be quarterly or monthly or annually, will be determined by us as the board as well.
Correct, right. It would be determined based on need, and I could foresee where, in the beginning, you might be meeting a little bit less frequently, but then once it gets up and running, you might be meeting more frequently.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Very, very nice, very detailed. My question is, obviously, everyone would like to have free Wi-Fi, and we have carriers that are in the business to charge everyone for Wi-Fi. You get regular speed, intermediate speed, high speed, ultra speed, and all those come at a different price range. So what, on this agreement with PRHA, can you share some details on that? Is that agreement, or Verizon and the Coxes of the world, do we have to negotiate with them? And also, the other part of my question is, going back to the free Wi-Fi, what prevents all of our citizenry from getting free Wi-Fi?
Well, that's again going to be entirely up to you all as the board as to whether you do actually want to offer the free Wi-Fi, whether you want to have, whether you want to charge for it. This is an idea, but until we get the agreements done that you have to approve, there would be no free Wi-Fi. So it's an idea that's out there. It's up to you if you'd like to provide free or whether it will be discounted or not.
So that is at the discretion of this council, ultimately?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Kelsey, Mr. Swinger, will Cox even be involved, or will this be direct Wi-Fi?
It's somewhat complicated right now, but at this point, Cox would probably be involved at some point in that chain of getting, for lack of a better term, internet to the ring that will then be broadcast out. So at this point, even if the authority were to provide free Wi-Fi to the residents of PRHA, Cox or Verizon or whomever they decide to get their internet from would still be a part of that.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Barnes, sir, you have the floor. Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor. Apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We spent, it was said, $50 million to do the broadband situation. I'm interested in, we're going to save the school board money. And that's a wonderful term, excellent terminology. But the terminology that I'm interested in is the bottom line. How much are we going to save them? How much are they spending now? Are there any perks from the Housing Authority as the oversight group? Have they been given funds that should come toward the broadband for those citizens there? How much is it saving the city? How do we make money? How do we not get used in negotiations? Do we have to have a buffer between us and the group that will be giving services to? Say, for instance, if Verizon wants to use some of our service, can we deal directly with them? What are the standard costs for services? Or do we have to have a buffer between us, and do we have to negotiate with them to negotiate with Verizon for us? And do we approve that? These are just some of the parameters that are important to the council, and that the council needs to know before they can accurately and professionally lead the citizens as the governing body for this broadband. I want the maximum yield for the city to try and alleviate taxes on our citizens. So I've been told a lot of things about broadband. I've been told I've had a meeting with our standing U.S. senators, and they've given me some information. But we really need a workshop where we can understand all the parameters and make this as beneficial as we can for the city. You gave us a nice general situation, but we need someone who can give us specifics, the numbers, all of the things that I just asked. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councilman Battle. And as for some of those numbers, we do have them already.
Yes, ma'am.
The amount that we've spent on the broadband ring so far is a lot less than 50 million. I believe the city manager has the exact numbers on that, but it's closer to just a little less than 12 million. And we do also, I think, have some numbers on how much just the city in and of itself is projected to save over the next 20 years.
Well, how can we be so far off at the onset as to say this is a $50 million investment? Did we put $50 million in, or did we put $12 million in? Because with such a disparity in those numbers, it seems like at some point we didn't know what we were doing, or we made a large error. So why would we say 50 and it's only 12?
Mr. Better, where did you get that $50 million figure from?
Well,
We've
that-
never stated $50 million, as
Well,
far as I know.
please don't say that we've never said it.
Well, I'm just asking, you got an estimate of 12 million?
Well,
and-
well,
And I'm just wondering where
Well,
the
at the
50 million.
onset, when I came on the council, it was stated in several council meetings that we were spending $50 million for the project. Now, whether they erred or not, that's one thing. And where I got it, it's an insulting question. I had to have gotten it from the council. And at that point, you weren't an acting attorney. There was another attorney here. So please be kinder with your approach to us when you're, where did you get that from? That's not respectful terminology. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And one thing I will say, if I could add something to that, and I'm going to recognize you, sir, in a moment. I was, and Councilwoman Lucas Burke were in those conversations, and I don't recall hearing 50 million. I do know that there was a number between 10 and 12 million that was discussed, so that's just my recollection. So we understand that this is a process that will be moving forward, and so, Dr. Whitaker, sir,
Yes,
you have the floor.
yes. Attorney, I didn't get your last.
Swearinga.
Swearino.
Yes.
That was, okay. Attorney Swear, my question is a little more basic. It's the concern that I raised previously, and it goes back to the structure, and I'm still not clear. This council is serving as directors on an authority, and there's been quite a bit of contracting activity that has taken place so far, to the tune of the 12 million that you mentioned. And my question and concern is that if council is an authority and on a board of directors on this authority, and council has not been made abreast of any of the activities that have taken place, any contracting, I just find that seems to be out of order as far as what the role of this authority is, and as far as the role of the board of directors, if all of this activity is taking place and we really have no knowledge of any of these transactions. And so who determined that, or what determined the role that this council would play in regards to these transactions? I know you said there are some articles of incorporation.
Yes, Councilman. So the authority has done no contracting so far. The authority has not taken any actions outside of the initial incorporation with the State Corporation Commission. All of the contracting that has occurred thus far has been part of the city's own capital improvement projects. So all the contracting, which occurred, I believe, back in 2017, 2018, was using the city's normal procurement process. And it was handled just as any other normal capital improvement project was handled. So the authority currently doesn't control and doesn't own anything.
Right. And that's my concern, because you said that it's being handled as any other capital improvement project, but council doesn't serve as a board of directors over other capital improvement projects. And so it would seem that those transactions would have been brought to the attention to council, and even at this point, we have no idea as a board of directors of what's been the transactions that have occurred. And so I would think that council would need to be updated more than just what we have here, but some specific numbers and contracting that has transpired.
Well, so far, the authority does not own or control anything. So, and the authority was only created in September of last year, whereas these contracts have been in existence for years. So in your capacity as board of directors, you've had nothing to contract with, essentially, yet.
Well, right. Well, it's not a matter of the board contracting. I'm just saying that as a board of directors over an authority for which transactions are taking place, we have not been made aware of any of these transactions, even though they are, as you said, going through the normal capital improvement process. But then again, as I said, this isn't a normal capital improvement process.
Well,
Dr. Whitaker, the city manager is asking to provide some additional information for us. So can we allow for her to provide that additional information, sir?
Right.
Yes, the staff has prepared a report back that will be coming out tomorrow with all the specific transactions that have occurred. One of the pieces of information that I wanted to include in that was minority participation, and we received that information today. So we will send out an update that shows every contractor we've had, the amount of money that was spent with the contract, the total that's been spent to date, as well as the minority participation.
All right, thank you. And we should be kept abreast at
Going
each of our
forward.
meetings, right, moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Is it possible for us to get a spreadsheet on the monies saved by us having and operating our own network? Case in point, what is the school board spending now? What will they be spending if they go through the city? What have we been spending, and how much savings we will have, and on where applicable?
We'll get that to you.
And what is the non-something agreement?
the non-exclusive
Yes.
agreement?
Yes.
So fiber franchise agreements where third parties want to locate their fiber infrastructure in Portsmouth's right-of-way. The non-exclusive fiber franchise agreement says, yes, you can locate your fiber infrastructure in our right-of-way, but you aren't the only third party that can occupy Portsmouth's right-of-way, that you can allow the many different companies and entities to, allow them to do this.
And it's just a matter of them requesting, and we have to comply with their request.
You do not have to comply with their request. They are asking for it. They have bids like the small cell facilities that are going to be read, and ultimately, it's up to you as council whether you choose to approve it or not, but it doesn't really harm the city in any way. Like I said, they're non-exclusive, so many companies can have them, and it doesn't really hurt the city because if we ever need that space for anything, we can push them out of the way.
Right, but we were told in a prior meeting that we're compelled by law to accommodate them.
Those are for small cell franchise agreements, and these are fiber franchise agreements, which are very similar to small cell, but there are still some differences between the two.
So we would need to be explained that further, the differences in the sales and the requirements on whether we have to comply or it's optional to comply. So we need an addressing and a meeting dealing with that possibly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Lucas Burke, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor and Attorney Swaringer. One final question for me is, in the presentation about the ring, it says that it's supposed to lower the city's rising costs for internet services. So are we going to still need our current provider, or will it be a combination of the fiber and the ring that we have, and we'll still have to use another provider for some other part of the service? How is that going to work?
From my understanding right now, and Mr. Jones might be the better person to ask for this, but right now, we're still using the providers because the ring isn't complete yet. And at least the short term, it'll be a combination of our ring and another provider. But the idea is that we will have our own connection and be self-sufficient in that arena.
That's what I want to know. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes. So the public hearing item that we're voting on tonight regarding the franchise agreement, how is that different from the broadband?
So, well, it is a form of broadband, but it's different from our fiber ring because obviously we don't need to ask ourselves permission to occupy our own right-of-way. Instead, these are third parties that I think they're both internet service providers themselves who want to locate their fiber infrastructure in the right-of-way so they can serve Portsmouth residents and businesses. So that's, I guess, how it differs.
But it's not part of the Portsmouth ring?
Correct.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be, I mean, it's kind of different when folk apply for this broadband before it's completed. It's, kind of different to normal things. So wouldn't it be wise to satisfy your own backyard before you take on other contracts before the project is complete?
So these fiber franchise agreements are completely separate from Portsmouth's own ring, and they don't take up space away from Portsmouth's own ring. It doesn't, we're not really in competition with them. Really, it's kind of the more the merrier, because the more access, the more fiber availability that's in Portsmouth, the more desirable Portsmouth is to businesses, data centers, places with these large data needs. And like I said before, Portsmouth projects always get priority over our own right-of-way. So in some circumstance where a third party with a franchisee were to be occupying a space that Portsmouth needed for any reason, we can move them out of the way, even if they have a franchise agreement with us. So that's why I was saying before, it doesn't really hurt Portsmouth to have these. It can only help grant more access to this infrastructure.
And there's no liability for us not honoring the agreement that we do with them. There's no liability in us backing out at any time.
You mean whether you can deny the request?
No, say for instance, well, that too, but say for instance, we have did a contractual agreement with them, and then we decide when the things are in operation that we need to do what we need to do with our obligations first, and we say to them, well, we'll maybe later. I mean, does that contract hold any liability for the city of Portsmouth?
No, so the contracts themselves are for 7 years, and after that, Portsmouth can terminate and doesn't have to renew them at all.
But I'm
And-
saying, the first year, if we say, okay, we don't want to do this with you, we're going to, do this another way, and we back up, is there liability involved?
Well,
So, in other words, we need to be careful taking on these agreements because they are binding and do have liability involved with them.
well, we're not liable for anything they put in the ground. They are solely liable for their own property that they're putting in there, and there are certain bonds they have to pay.
I mean, for not using our service.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am.
No, they don't have to contract with us as an authority or us as a city in any way. That's
No,
completely.
what I'm saying is whatever the agreement is that we get in together, are there liabilities involved if we, I've read that there's 7 years, and after that, every year we can renegotiate. I understand that, but I'm saying if we decide not to at any point in those 7 years or the years after where we reevaluate, is there liability involved for the city?
I suppose there could be liability
Oh.
if within that 7 years, we decide to, without giving them warning and without good reason, we tear out their lines. That, I guess.
Well, that sounds like a hypothetical that any situation could fly through the courts. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to see everybody live, finally. I think the next item we're bringing up is the stipends for commissioners and board members of PPIC, EDA, PRHA, and the Planning Commission. This was discussed before. There's been some emails on it. Right now, we are not allowed to pay planning commissioners. There is an ordinance on the books that says we can't pay those. So if we do want to pay the planning commissioners, we will have to rescind that statute, that ordinance. It's 2-528. And then we would have to do a resolution approving payments to the different commissioners and volunteers and so forth. It's up for discussion tonight amongst you all to see how you want to proceed, whether you want to make it an agenda item, maybe next meeting or whenever. There's some other things to consider, though. If you do decide to pay these volunteers, again, besides having to rescind that statute that prohibits the payment to at least planning commissioners, You're going to have to approve or have a resolution approving payments, and then what amount, how much you want to pay the different commissioners, and also how they're going to be paid. I believe in most cities, they're paid by the commission or the board itself, not the city. Now, I think I'm not sure if the Planning Commission has any money. I think the other entities, the three others, do have money. But typically, the entity pays their commissioners the stipend for attending meetings and doing the other duties. And so, open it up for discussion. I don't know if there's a consensus there, Mayor, and if there is a consensus, we will proceed how you all tell us to proceed.
Thank you, sir, for that information. And at this time, the floor is open for discussion.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Attorney Stromberg, just want to make sure we're clear. You said typically the actual entities pay those commissioners. Is there something in our code or state law that prohibits council from actually paying them?
No, I don't think so. There's nothing that prohibits the city from paying them directly, as far as I know.
Okay.
We checked with some other cities from our office, and that's what we heard mostly. And I think we sent out a listing of the different cities a few weeks ago as to who pays what commissioners and what boards and so forth. And it varies quite a bit. Some cities pay more than others. Some pay certain boards and commissions. It varies greatly, as you all saw from that sheet we put out.
Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
So what will we need a consensus on to move forward?
Number one, whether you want to pay these individuals or not, I think is the threshold question. And if you do want to pay them, if there's a consensus to pay these people, including planning, you would then have a consensus to rescind the law that prohibits payment to planning commissioners, and then a consensus as to how much you want to pay these people and who pays them.
Mayor, I want to ask that well, after the discussion, that we ask for a consensus, if that's cool.
We will ask for a consensus after the discussion.
Question?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke.
Great, thank you, Attorney Stromberg.
Sure.
I guess my question is, we're looking at one or two particular boards. Will we need to go in and look at all of the boards after we make a decision? I mean,
Yeah.
you ruling on one board, I mean, how will we be viewed as council members as choosing favoritism over which boards and commissioners we're going to choose to pay? I mean, I know they all standalone boards, but what will be our governing responsibility to look at other boards? I mean, I'm not in favor. I've served on boards and commissions for over 10 years and never asked for a dime, was never looking to receive a dime. And other people who have served as well have told me that, you know, they do that for their public service, for organizations that they belong into, or other opportunities to be able to advance their careers or to be able to advance just their standing in their own city or giving
Sure.
back to their city. So I guess my question is, how far do we take this once
Yeah,
we choose one board?
It's up to you guys. Right now, the four boards that were advanced by, I think, some proponents of this were those four I mentioned, Portsmouth Port Industrial Commission, the EDA, the PRHA, and the Planning Commissions were the four that were suggested, and those were the ones we checked into and found that one board or one commission, the Planning Commission, you can't pay. That's why we have to rescind that ordinance if you all want to move forward with paying these individuals.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, paying a volunteer volunteers their time and their skills. The key there is volunteers. And I have not had the first member of any board or commission in our city come to me and say, hey, Bill, I feel like we should be paid. In fact, I've had just the opposite. I've had board and commission members come to me and they feel that this is a terrible idea. You know, it's an oxymoron. You're going to pay a paid volunteer. That doesn't even mesh. I think I don't think it's a good move for this council. I think it's slapping a face to the many hundreds of volunteers that have volunteered their time and their skills to our city through the years. And before we do this, I think there should be a groundswell coming from the board and commission members, because I haven't heard it. Once again, I've heard just the opposite, and I don't think that we should be diminishing the volunteerism has been called as the highest form of patriotism. I think we cheapen the word by giving them a stipend. You know, it'd be different if we had volunteers that were incurring expenses that lived elsewhere and had to travel here. I could see that. I cannot see paying a volunteer.
And of course, we're not taking a position one way. We just do what you guys want to do.
I realize that,
Yeah.
but I can also give my opinion.
No, of course, and I just want to make clear that
my
we're...
opinion is that I'm vehemently opposed to it.
Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. From the research when you guys did the research, those boards were generally the ones that other cities had paid, correct?
I'd have to check the list.
Because I think that was the grounds of it. Also, as far as the volunteers, yes, they are volunteers, and this is definitely not a salary for them. But I think when it comes to the meetings and when it comes to the times and things, they also are doing our work hours. And with that being said, they do have to take that time off to actually participate in those meetings. And that's not to say that because of that situation they shouldn't volunteer, but I think that we encourage more people to actually get involved in the process if we give them some type of incentive. So if you have a meeting like PPIC that meets at 8 o'clock, or you have an EDA who meets at 8 o'clock, or you have a planning commission who meets at 1:30, or PRHA meets at 5:30, to actually attend those meetings, they actually have to take off some time. So to encourage people, good people, to volunteer, because not saying we don't have good volunteers, but to open up the process to get more people involved, I think we give them some type of incentive so that they can cover that time doing work, so that they can be a part of the process. Because there's a lot of people, because contrary to what you say, Mr. Moody, I've had other people come to me and say they want to volunteer, but their time at their jobs, they just can't afford to take off. And because of this, I think it provides them an incentive so that they can take off and do the work that they would like to do for our city. So I am in favor of it. Thank you.
To try to answer your question, Vice Mayor Barnes, it varies so much, it's hard to tell from city to city, but if you went through it and identified those four, I'm sure you were right. Some cities pay almost no boards, Virginia Beach, whereas Hampton tends to pay more. It's all over the map. It's really hard to find any trend or anything.
And we currently do pay some boards, correct?
Yeah, the Board of Equalization, they're quasi-judicial. They get paid. There may be one or two others.
Are they they're not volunteers?
They get, I think, $50, but again, they're court appointed and they do judicial work.
Are they volunteered though? Are they volunteers?
You know, I'm not positive. I think they're appointed by the court, but they are probably volunteers in a sense, other than the $50 that I think they get per meeting.
Thank you.
Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor.
I'm going to assume that boards and commissions were meant for those folk that had the time. We understand that folk don't have time. We understand the hardships that it put on some folk with their jobs. And basically, it was designed for those folk who had time on their hand, who wanted to just give back to the city. we're getting into a political element here when we throwing the money around. People do strange things for money. Yeah, you get more people running at those positions, but it's not. It's not for the reasons that we designed the boards and commissions for. They're basically designed for those folk who got time on their hand, who have had experience in the city, and you can't take a freshman and throw them on the board. They have to learn, but it's basically open for those folk that have time on their hand. It wasn't meant to put a hardship on anybody, and it wasn't designed to pay. Now, other cities have stepped into that realm, and someday we may do that, but that's not what it was designed for. If you didn't have the time or don't have the time, it's not designed for you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Schomburg, thank you for the information, and I agree with what has been stated previously by Vice Mayor Barnes, that when these 4 positions were originally presented to council, it was based upon some information of what was happening in other cities. So it wasn't something just randomly thought of. Right. Also, the fact that there are volunteers who are being paid on other boards and commissions, and these 4 are boards and commissions which typically are involved in significant contracts that are coming through our city. Mm-hmm. And so those were some of the criteria that we thought of as far as those who should be receiving some type of stipend. The pay and compensation that this is being made an equivalent to, I think is not a comparison. This isn't trying to pay someone. This is just giving a stipend for their volunteer work on a board that deals with significant dollars in our city. Also, there are realities that are different from when these boards were originally created, which typically were served on by persons who did have the time to serve. This is a different era today, where you have persons who are working, some working 2 and 3 jobs. They shouldn't be penalized because of a time and pay issue as far as their desire to serve the city. And so I would hope that we would not analyze this from a perspective of just pure volunteerism, but that we're trying to also compensate persons or give stipends for persons who have served significantly with contracts in our city.
Thank you.
And the last thing I want to say is that I can remember serving on the school board when there was a issue of increase in pay, and persons were making similar arguments that we hear today, mm-hmm. that we're just here volunteering our time, we're not seeking pay. Boards across the state get paid, and so those salaries were increased, and Portsmouth is still at a level below many others, but I'm hearing some of the similar arguments, and for those persons who, if they do get paid and feel that they want to keep it on a purely volunteer basis, it's nothing prohibiting them from donating that back to the city. Sure. So that consideration about time and pay, I think that we have to move in a more modern era of addressing some of the concerns that might keep people from serving on these boards.
And we'll carry out whatever the will of council is.
Right.
We're not taking a stand in any way.
Thank you, sir. And I do have a comment regarding that. You know, to the discussion that I've been listening to, I would say in totality, there is a difference between an elected office and a volunteer office, first of all. you do set yourself up in an elected office to serve, but you have to be elected to serve. And that requires a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of commitment. In the discussion of a volunteer is someone who gives of their time and expertise voluntarily to improve the quality of life of their city, their community, whatever that discipline is. The reality is, service is the rent that you pay for being on the planet. I can recall, and I just use myself as an example, when our children were little, when we were struggling, we didn't have big incomes, we had one car. My wife and I decided that we were going to volunteer because we felt that being a responsible citizen required that we got to give back to our community. When we didn't have resources, we gave back in time. So the incentive to serve is that you give back your time and you create a better community for everyone. That is my position. I in no way think that we need to pay anyone further for volunteering. When they show up to volunteer, most volunteers will tell you they don't want any pay for what they're doing. They're volunteering because they want to improve the quality of life for the citizens and their community. So this notion of having this discussion about volunteerism and paying folks, that's perhaps a reality, but at the end of the day, we set a bad precedent. And I've gotten a number of calls from citizens who indicated if we start paying folks, they're going to stop volunteering. And that may not be a big thing to some of us, but it is a big thing to many of us. And I think without volunteers participating on our boards and commissions and organizations, we would not be able to do the people's business. So I'm not in favor of paying anyone any additional funds, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'm just curious. Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Whittard, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, first of all, I just want to say I think that's a little far-fetched by thinking we're going to lose volunteers by giving them a stipend. Pretty much, we're not doing any, changing any laws or any bylaws or whatnot to accommodate any bills these volunteers may have. But I think it does show our leadership by showing a token of appreciation by giving them some stipend to show that we appreciate their service. Pretty much, I think we're being very intricate when we're talking about the commissioners of how much they get paid or whatnot. I don't think we're trying to give them a higher amount or than the other volunteers per se. We just want to give something that can be consistent based on their particular service on these boards. So I think we don't need to make that a big issue going forward. I support us paying these volunteers. I think it's something that we need to do. Like you say, we can get the best people in our city to possibly volunteer more. If we're not looking to substitute a whole day of pay, I think we're just looking to encourage people to take their time off their jobs and look into really what we have to offer for Portsmouth. So if we can do this, I think this would be the best thing we can have to get the best people in Portsmouth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Well, Mr. Woodard, I don't think you have to fearmonger to support a point. This exodus of volunteers, if persons start being paid, I don't know of any data that you have that supports that. And I think we do have data showing that cities are functioning well with paid volunteers. So I don't, let's just keep it on the facts and not try to create these fear-mongering situations to support our points.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
And, it's a shame that those people said that they would leave, but, since me and Councilman Whitaker have been on the personnel committee with boards and commissions, we've had a long list of people ready to volunteer their time, more than usual. A lot of boards and commissions, especially those, have like a 20-person wait. So I don't think that we will lose volunteers. I think with this council, and with the encouragement of some of us, we've had more volunteers than usual.
Mr. Battle, sir, do you want the floor?
Yes,
Is your
sir.
hand up?
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
and after Mr. Battle speaks, we'll ask for the consensus, because we need to move on. We're on the time schedule tonight. Thank you. Mr. Battle, sir, you have the floor.
I am a volunteer. I have volunteered all my life. I have started leagues. I have provided security for leagues. I have done the scheduling and everything from A to Z. I've tutored in the afternoon for years. We're talking about 50-plus years. I was offered money by folk that hold nonprofits like this gentleman. I never took a dime, not one dime, because I was afraid that he wouldn't have the money to provide, to help the league to get along. So I didn't take gas money. If you want to take me to dinner, no, put it in, buy the kids hot dogs after the game. And times change, and I know they change, but that's a volunteer. And to this day, I won't take one dime for doing him a favor, volunteering for him, her, or anybody. I work. Where I can't volunteer, I won't. But a volunteer has nothing to do with money. A true volunteer don't even want it. Now, we'll add another element. We'll get a lot of people, and there'll be another element of folk. And money, you get some strange bedfellows behind money. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I want to say one thing.
Okay, we're going to close the discussion after this, sir. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that we, because I don't think we put out a total yet, and well, we have in past meetings, but the stipend that we was talking about was $100 per meeting that they attended, which I don't think will be enough to cover any bills that they have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So at this time, I know there was a request to ask for a consensus. So all those in favor of paying the stipend, would you please raise your hand? There's 3. All those that are not in favor, please raise your hand. 4-3. That is the consensus of council. We move forward.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, I bring to you a PowerPoint presentation on the legalization of marijuana. Maybe a little lighter topic than we just went through, but at any rate, the General Assembly of Virginia approved...
Attorney Stromberg, could you hold your thought for a minute? Sure. Dr. Whitaker, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, since this is a lighter subject and it's not really something that's pending or anything we going to make any decisions on tonight or either upcoming, can we put the marijuana presentation to another, because we have some more pertinent issues that we really need to discuss.
You know,
How much time do you need with this, sir?
This is a very quick, it's about 5 minutes, and it does become legal July 1.
I think this is important because it is going to be legalized July 1, and the citizens and we as a body need to be informed.
Well, would it be more appropriate then to give this update during our regular meeting where we have?
No, sir. This is our work session, and this is the meeting in which we needed to conduct our business. Thank you.
Marijuana is becoming legal July 1st, but there's a lot of constraints on it. A person 21 years Next slide. Person 21 years of age or older may possess, lawfully possess on his person or in a public place not more than 1 ounce of marijuana. If you possess greater than an ounce but less than a pound, there's a $25 civil fine. Possessing more than a pound can still get you 1 to 10 years in jail and $250,000 fine. And if you possess it on public school grounds, it's a Class 2 misdemeanor. Next slide. Sales are still illegal, but you may gift up to an ounce of marijuana, but you can't do it in public. As far as consumption, it's illegal to consume marijuana in public. There's a $25 fine for that. But public place is defined sort of an interesting way. You can rent a hotel or restaurant if it's private, for private parties. Private recreational charter boats, you are allowed to have marijuana at those places. They're not considered public because they're enclosed. As far as growing, you may grow up to 4 plants per household. It can't be visible from the street. You have to take precautions to prevent access to minors, and the plants must be tagged with certain information, your name and things of that nature. As far as driving under the influence is still a crime. There's a presumption that a driver has consumed if there's an open container found in the passenger area. So if you are driving with it, keep it in your trunk. There's no law, and probably the biggest thing out of the driving area is that no law enforcement officer may lawfully stop, search, or seize any person, place, or thing solely based on the odor of marijuana. There were complaints that the law was being applied racially motivated in a way. And so that eliminates that issue. Finally, retail sales are not available until 2024. The state legislature, though, can rescind this whole retail sales setup if they want next year, and it would go away. As far as local government, if you don't want marijuana in your local government, you can prevent it or prohibit it through a referendum, but you have to do that by December 31st, 2022, and I'll bring it back if need be. State tax on it is 21%. City can apply a 3% tax to retail sales when they become legal. You still won't be able to smoke or ingest marijuana in local parks or other public places. This locality will have some control as far as zoning, land use requirements, business license requirements, and hours of operation. Any questions on that? I know I went through it quickly, but it's fairly straightforward. And if you have any questions, you feel free to contact me in my office. Councilwoman Burke.
One question that has been, I guess, the elephant in the room for many businesses and organizations, cities, first responders. I guess people want to know what is the testing going to be if they are having a weekend with family and friends or whatever.
And come to work. That's still being worked out. There was a webinar not long ago. I think some of you may have seen that. And it's still being worked out. It's a real issue.
Right.
There's going to have to be tests that are so specific where, if you smoked it, say that morning or something, or came to work and it was clear that, you by some rapid test that you smoked or ingested it, then perhaps there might be some recourse. So it's sort of like somebody coming to work drunk, I guess.
Yeah.
Similar to that. Okay. But that's still to be worked out. Is that all?
Are there any more questions from my colleagues on council? Thank you, Attorney Stromberg. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor. Here to introduce and give a law orientation. I wanted to do this several months ago, and because y'all were so busy, got bumped several times. Next slide. I appreciate y'all allowing me to introduce my staff. It's an excellent staff. We're 10 people, 7 attorneys. 1 attorney is part-time, Robert Marriage, you see. Next slide. These are myself, of course, right there. I was appointed interim city attorney about 10 months ago, but I've been with the city for 11 years. I handled the litigation, organized, managed it, and tried a lot of cases. Also worked a lot in the J&D courts, which was very satisfying, even though there's some terrible stories there. There's some satisfaction there. Luckily, though, I'm surrounded by some excellent attorneys and staff. Deputy City Attorney Jeff Miller, you all recognize him. He works with City Council more than anything. He drafts and reviews contracts, drafts resolutions and ordinances, handles real estate matters. He's reliable, he's smart as can be, and he's pivotal to our office. Next slide, please. Sheila Riddick is special also. They're all special. I got a wonderful staff there. They're wonderful people. Sheila's been with the city for 35 years. All right. She's known throughout the state as an expert in J&D law. She's spent most of her 35 years, or a good portion of that, in juvenile and domestic relations court. She appears in J&D court hundreds of times a year. She taught me J&D work. I used to be in J&D probably 3 days a week and trying several cases. She's also known for her love of kids. She has a fundraiser every year where she gives a $100 gift certificate, and we all contribute, and the community contributes to a foster child. And usually the older ones, because the younger ones are taken care of. It almost brings me to tears, quite frankly, what she does. Because I know these kids. I've seen success stories, and I've seen not so successful stories. And what she does is wonderful, and she's very valuable to the city and, of course, to my office. Derek Challenger has been with the city for about 4 years now. Derek is local. He's from Hampton, I believe, originally. He's not afraid of anything. He'll go to any court. You ask him on the spur of the moment, something comes up, you can send Derek. He goes and he learns, and he's fearless. And he does most of our federal work, even though a lot of that is hired out. He's wonderful with that. Kelsey Swearinga, you just met or saw. She's helps Jeff a lot, does some of the same things Jeff does. She's also our FOIA expert, and believe me, we have been FOIA'd to death in the last several months. It's died down a little bit. She represents the Historical Preservation Commission, EDA. She's been with us about 3 years. She learns new areas of municipal law very easily, and I can move her around, and she can just pick up and do anything. Bob Marriage, you may recognize that last name. Mr. Marriage's father was a famous judge, federal district judge, who ruled heroically on several segregation cases and Watergate cases. His dad actually needed FBI protection for the rest of his life because of the rulings he made to desegregate our society. This is his son. He's part-time. He does the city docket involving maintenance issues. He's a wonderful person, and he's sort of the fun guy around the office. Most recently, and he's been with us 10 years, Simone Booth has been with us probably about 1.5 years, 2 years. She's the new hire, so she gets moved all over the place. She's learning all kinds of areas of the law. I tell you, it warmed my heart when I was in the cleaners one day, and a J&D judge came up to me. I'll tell you who it was. It was Judge Griffin in J&D court, Diane Griffin. And she couldn't say enough good things about Simone. It was just wonderful. So she was wonderful in court, and you know, as her supervisor, it just made me feel great. Got just a wonderful group of attorneys. This is our support staff, Renita Goodwin. She manages the office, drafts documents, pays the bills. She's been with the city over 5 years. Marietta Jones has been with us for 4 years, handles the treasurer's work. I failed to mention that Derek does a lot of the treasurer's work, and so she works with him on that. She also does some J&D work with us. And lastly, Jennifer Robertson has been with us about 1 year. She's a receptionist and does J&D work and a variety of things. The staff is bright, they're wonderful, they're great to work with. I love them all, and it's a really good group. Next slide, please. Now, what do we do as a city attorney's office? We provide legal advice to city council, the city manager, and city departments. We review and draft contracts and agreements. We draft ordinances and resolutions for city council. We review and draft deeds and other real estate documents. We defend the city council, city officials, city employees from legal claims and lawsuits. We represent the treasurer's office. And I should add, because we do so much work with the treasurer's office, but we also work with the Commissioner of Revenue's office, permits and inspections. We represent them and give them advice. And we're in court quite often for all of them. The last thing, we represent Portsmouth Department of Social Services and Behavioral Health Services. That takes up a lot of the time. And of course, we represent all departments, but these are some of the ones that are the busiest. Next slide, please. Getting to claims and litigation. As I mentioned, we're tasked with defending the city council members, city officials, and you all have seen some of the cases, a variety of defendants. We have about 25 cases at a time. Now, that doesn't include the hundreds and hundreds of cases that we have in J&D court and permits and inspections and Commissioner of Revenue. There's treasurer. These are 25 major cases that are usually either the city is the defendant or an employee of the city or an official council member, whoever it might be. We handle a lot of those claims, especially in general district court, and personal injury cases in circuit court. But sometimes we have to hire outside counsel due to conflicts of interest, police shooting cases. If the police, are pointing at each other, it's obviously a conflict of interest, so we have to go out and hire outside attorneys to do that. And sometimes we need a specialist. Lots of times I need a labor attorney, an employment attorney. We don't have anybody in the office that is especially qualified or has that expertise. We have some, but we can answer questions, but when it comes to litigation with employment matters, we tend to hire out. I do have openings in the office. I think we have 3 vacancies, 3 attorney positions, 2 or 3. And if there were to be a hire, I think an employment labor lawyer would be the one, and we could probably maybe bring some of the workers' comp into the office. That person would do that also. The city is self-insured up to $1 million. That means that any claim or judgment, any judgment or settlement up to $1 million comes out of the city risk management fund. Now above $1 million, we have excess coverage. If there were a judgment over $1 million, that would go to our excess carrier. It's called States Insurance, and they would cover anything over $1 million up to $10 million. Lastly, settlements, verdicts, and attorney fees are generally paid out of the risk management fund. It's an ample fund. It's I believe, a line item on the budget that money goes into every year. But it's very normal to have a risk management fund for any city. That's how these claims are paid. It's cheaper to do that than to have insurance on those claims up to $1 million. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you all might have on this. I think we're going to go in a closed session at some point if you all want to talk about or you want me to review specific cases that I can't describe in public because it could hurt our stance on the case, our strategy on the case. Do you all have any questions about our office or what we do?
Good job.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have a question?
Would this be an appropriate time, since Attorney Stromberg is before us, to ask about the charter process, amendment process?
Absolutely, if he's prepared to address it.
Right.
Absolutely.
So we know that we have a consensus on the non-interference, taking out the language of criminal prosecution.
Right.
The recall, is that something that we can get a consensus on at this point, Mayor, after we have a discussion on the recall?
I believe that we can, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be report back, but I don't mind doing it now. I sent out the memo, and
Right.
let me get that
Okay.
material. I don't have it with me on this file. Okay, what I did with that, Dr. Whitaker, this was for everyone's information. Well, first of all, the civil penalties that you mentioned on the other charter provision, that will be coming, there'll be a public hearing in, I think, the next council meeting, the one after that on that, and we'll vote, and that's on the timetable to get to the legislative delegation to take up to Richmond. This one can also make its way if you all want this. What I did, Councilman Whitaker, you had originally, I think there was a desire maybe to rescind that charter provision as far as recalling people, and then just relying on the state law as far as recalling people, which was a lot more specific, and the Commonwealth's attorney would be involved, the judge would be involved, and at the last meeting, I think there was a consensus to keep our charter provision, but make it more specific, and have grounds, more specific grounds before a recall could happen. I sent out, did you all receive what I sent out? What I did basically is just took the language from the state code and inserted it into our city code to give it some specificity. Do you have any questions about that?
Yes, and
Okay.
thank you for providing that information, and it does address, I think, the issue that Mr. Battle,
Exactly.
Councilman Battle had, as well as the issue I had as far as criteria. I
Right.
see that we met a common ground here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did have questions in regards to some of the language, and in paragraph B,
Yes, sir.
where it says a petition signed by electors equal in number to at least 30% of the electors. That 30% figure, that's not state code, is it?
No, the state code had a different provision.
Yeah.
They did 10% of the people, the voters that voted
In the
in the
government.
last council election. And I contacted the Board of Elections because it was so confusing. And it's the total votes that were cast in
Right.
city council. And, you know, each person had 3 votes because there were 3 vacancies. So it was 104,000 votes. If you took 10% of that, it'd be about 10,000 signatures you would need on the petition.
Well, my question and
Okay,
my
I'm sorry.
concern is that recalling an elected official is a major thing. It should not be something that a small percentage of people can make a decision on. It should be something that I would think that my colleagues would want to see something of this significance, that it would at least take a supermajority to recall an official. And that's why I was asking, was this state code,
No,
or
it's
just, that's what a council decided
Yeah, whoever-
some years ago?
Right.
The number 30%.
Yeah,
We
and that-
do know that there are some provisions that require a supermajority for
correct.
council to pass
correct.
certain ordinances.
Right.
And the way that this particular section of our code has been abused, particularly only against African-American elected officials in this city, that I believe that this council needs to strengthen this, not only with the criteria, but not just letting a few folks determine what we have already decided in an election. The cost that is involved, the time that's involved, the tainting of character that is involved with that, I think it should require a supermajority. And so I'm asking my colleagues if there's a consensus on it, that 30% be changed to 2/3, being consistent with other provisions within our code that require supermajority. The other issue that I would like for my colleagues to consider is the language that follows in the next line. It says, beginning with the word demanding, demanding the election of a successor of the office sought to be removed. I think just to make sure that that removal should be based on one of the grounds being met in subsection A. It probably is referencing that, but I'm just
Yeah, because next
suggesting
sentence,
be
I
more.
went ahead and said, the petition shall contain specific statement of the grounds as described above upon which
Right.
the election of a successor is sought.
Right.
So I thought that covered that. And I also, in section C, what I did, because I didn't want somebody just to allege that somebody, say, committed a crime and should come off counsel, I added, in addition, a judge of the circuit court may hold a hearing and take evidence to determine the sufficiency of the petition. Prior to that, all the judge had to do is just sort of summarily
Right.
look at it and make sure it looked right.
Right.
I've allowed the judge to actually say, no, there are grounds, or no, they're not grounds. None of these specific items
Okay.
that were mentioned aren't there. I'm not going to okay this.
Okay, that was my third issue, that
Correct.
when you use the term petition in the language, that the petition being certified was not just the number, but also that judge would be certifying
Right.
that one of the criteria was
Yeah,
met.
and that's why I said evidentiary hearing, because he would have to take evidence as to whether this person who's been
Okay.
trying to be recalled actually broke the law or
Okay.
did some of these things. So, yeah, I saw that same weakness, and that's
Okay.
how I dealt with it. I'll take any suggestions, though. Getting back to the numbers, in a memo I sent out back in early June, when the thought was to rescind this provision totally, I use an example from the last election. And if you look at the charter section, 30% of the electors who voted for governor in the preceding gubernatorial election, that would have been 8,600 required signatures on the petition. Under the state code, at 10%, now it was an unusual council election because we had 3 vacancies, but it would have required 10,500 signatures. And so it's very, the numbers from the state code and our present city charter are similar. They would probably be somewhere between the 8,000 and 10,000 number
Right.
of signatures needed for the petition.
Yeah, my concern to my colleagues is just that, again, for something that significant, it should not be a minority of the vote at 30%. It should be a supermajority, and that's my concern with
Right.
that figure.
Now, there is still an election held afterwards, of course, and there's a
Right.
vote to be what Mr. Battle wanted, and so that's
Right.
still in there.
Right, but to get to that point.
To get to that point, you want a supermajority.
I'm just, that's really, unless it's a legal issue with
Yeah,
that.
that's the only thing I'd like to check into,
Okay.
because that is so many, it's almost an
Yes.
election.
That's a big number.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean-
that's something that we need to have
Let me-
certainty on that.
Yeah, I'll check that, whether a supermajority is even allowed.
Right.
I could see a higher percentage, but a supermajority is pretty high.
At least a majority, but if you get back with us on the legality of it.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'll get back with you on that, and I guess I'll report back as to whether this becomes an agenda item, because if it does, we'll want to move forward with public notice and all that.
Well, will we be able to attach this to the public hearing that will occur at the next?
No, it'll be a separate public hearing a few weeks later.
Okay, but
It'll
it'll
be
still
separate.
be in line to go with the legislative package?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have till November or so for that, so we've
Okay.
got ample
Okay.
time. I'm sorry. Mayor.
If we're gonna have the judge to decide whether there's charges, grounds to charge, I think that could be a conflict of interest, because he's gonna decide whether there's grounds to charge, and then they're gonna decide on guilt.
No, no guilt. It's not a criminal matter. He would not be involved. He would recuse
If it
himself
goes forward.
if for some reason.
I mean, but the same folk that charge, the same department will be the same one that evaluate the guilt. So wouldn't it be better? So wouldn't it be better if the Commonwealth attorney did the assessment whether it was room for charges? Wouldn't that be,
If there are criminal charges, yes, that's up to the Commonwealth's attorney.
Right.
As far as the sufficiency of the petition, the judge would just rule on whether the petition was sufficient on really 2 grounds. Number one, whether the signatures are in order.
Oh,
and-
okay,
and that.
okay.
And then, but the second one, he would render an opinion if he thought one was needed as to whether this person being recalled violated or did one of these things in paragraph A. And those would be neglect of duty, misuse of office, or incompetence in performance of duties when, I'm sorry. Again, the grounds would be neglect of duty, misuse of office, incompetence in the performance of duties when that neglect of duty, misuse of office, or incompetence in the performance of duties has a material adverse effect upon the conduct of the officer, of the office. So it just can't be something minor and you recall them. It's got to have an effect on the office too. And that's one of the things the judge would look at. And then he can also look at conviction of a misdemeanor after all rights of appeal have been terminated that would also have a material adverse effect upon the conduct of the office. And felonies are not listed because that's automatic in the code. That's separate. But you know, some misdemeanors are, you know, I mean, are nothing, and they don't have a bad effect on the office. But if there was something that was, you know, a class 1 misdemeanor or something like that, you know, then it might be grounds. But the judge would decide that also, or could take evidence on it to see the sufficiency of that. So it would prevent frivolous recalls, I believe.
And, Mr. Mayor.
Sir, you have the floor.
And Mr. Battle's issue and concern is addressed because the judge will not actually remove the person, but it would fall back to the hands of the
Yeah.
citizens to vote that
And your
person.
concern was taken care of, as Dr. Whitaker just said. The vote still goes on, you know, there's still a vote, the judge sets the date. Everything else stays the same pretty much, was previously in the charter that I believe you liked, Mr. Battle.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
We have a need to go into closed session. Dr. Whitaker or Vice Mayor Barnes, are you prepared to read the motion?
Yes. I move to go into a closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711, A.7, for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual or probable litigation, with such consultation or briefing in open meeting would be advisedly affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the city, specifically regarding the interim city attorney, general report of the activities of his office, and pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711, A.1, for the purpose of discussing and considering appointments to boards and commissions.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Mayor Glover?
Yes, we're in closed session. Council colleagues, Vice Mayor, we need to read the certification motion to come out of closed session.
Yes, sir. I hereby move that council members certify that, to the best of his or her knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Mayor Glover?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir.